The wicked vine dressers is our longest parable to date. It is also found in all three synoptic gospels and occurred in the final days of Jesus' ministry on earth. Times were tense, and Jesus reverted to teaching in parables. All gospels record the tension between Jesus and the religious authorities was reaching a fever pitch with increased aggressiveness.
According to Mark's setting, this parable was taught 2 days before Jesus was crucified. Jesus used this parable to directly confront the Jewish leaders who had come to trap and condemn him. The Pharisees and scribes had just questioned his authority, and with this parable, Jesus challenged their refusal to follow God. They were drawn in as captives into the story, and it did not take them long to realize that they were the object of the lesson.
Here another parable. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a tower. And he leased it to his vinedressers and went into a far country. Now when the vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vinedressers, that they might receive its fruit.
Now, to understand this parable, one needs to understand the phrases commonly used in the first century Israel. While God had used illustrations of Israel as referring to a fig tree, in the Old Testament the nation was also frequently described as a vineyard. Jesus began the parable by almost mirroring the prophet Isaiah's description of Israel being identified as a vineyard. With Isaiah's prophecy, God referred to the vineyard as representing Israel, and due to its sin and fruitlessness, he made the land desolate. In Isaiah's account, God described his beloved as being the owner of the vineyard, and even the Jews believed that this description, beloved, was pointing to their future Messiah. Jesus then moved away from Isaiah and provides his own vivid description of the events which follow. First, God built a hedge around the vineyard, dug a pit for the winepress, and even built a tower around it, ensuring he did everything possible to ensure that the vineyard produced significant fruit. The word hedge, translated from the Greek word phragmos, means fence, and in those days was a small stone wall. The winepress, like today, was used to extract the juice from the grapes. Typically, a pit was dug around the winepress, known as a wine vat, to enable the juices to be collected and stored. Obviously, a tower does not require explanation, and it highlights that this vineyard was under the protection of the owner. For the Jewish audience, this parable would have been easily understood. In fact, in all three accounts, it is noted at the conclusion of the parable that the Pharisees even perceived it was directed at them. So although Jesus was still busy describing the story before he applied the teaching relevance, the audience was well aware that the vineyard was representing the nation of Israel, and the vine dressers were the religious authorities in the land. Having known this, they would have known that the owner was symbolic of God himself. Now, the customs in those days was that the vine dressers, represents those in ruling positions, never owned the land, nor did they purchase it. The parable notes that the owner rented out the vineyard and went on his way. It was very common in Jesus' time, where wealthy landowners would enter into an arrangement with farmers to farm their land, and after a period of time, usually 4 to 5 years, they would send messengers or ambassadors to collect their part of the harvest. It was also usual for the tenants to give up to half of the value of the harvest collected in cash. It appears from this parable that the reward from the owner was its fruit or harvest, and not the actual cash.
And the vinedressers took his servants, beat one, killed one, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did likewise to them. Then last of all he sent his son to them, saying, They will respect my son.
one could possibly get the impression that the servants followed in very quick succession. However, both Mark and Luke indicated that this occurred over a very lengthy period of time, where the servants coming to collect their reward were treated significantly worse. In this sense, God had given them the law and the prophets as messengers and expected the Jewish nation to have a level of righteousness. This was obviously unacceptable behavior, and the audience would have expected Jesus to describe the owner in gathering up a large army and driving the wicked vinedressers from their land. Instead, the owner extended his mercy and this time decided to send the vinedressers his own flesh and blood, his only son. The owner had reasoned that surely they would respect his son.
But when the vinedressers saw the son, they said among themselves, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance." So they took him and cast him out of the vineyard and killed him.
Here we see Jesus highlighting his rejection at the hands of the religious Jews. The farmers, the religious leaders, took God's Son, Jesus Christ, and they ultimately killed him. They wanted to have leading positions with the Messiah, and this was one of the reasons they rejected Jesus. It also implies that these religious leaders knew exactly what they were doing. They recognized Jesus as their Messiah, but since he did not praise or consult with them, they rather chose to treat him worse than the former prophets. Now, some suggest that Jesus did not realize he was the Son of God when he was walking on the earth. This parable teaches us without any ambiguity that he knew very well he was the Son of God. The phrase, "cast him out of the vineyard," not only shows that the Son would be rejected, but possibly hence that his death would take place outside the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is provided as the one city that had killed the prophets in multiple scriptures.
Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do with these vinedressers? They said to him, "He will destroy those wicked men miserably and lease his vineyard to other vinedressers who will render to him the fruits in their seasons."
With this, Jesus pronounced the coming judgment on the city of Jerusalem and the thrust of it occurring on those in the temple area. There would be no further messages or warnings sent to Israel. Instead, the destruction of the vineyard, which is Israel and Jerusalem, was predicted. In 70 AD, less than 4 decades after Jesus was crucified, Jerusalem was destroyed and the Jewish nation was obliterated from their land in the Middle East. The remaining Jews were taken as prisoners and did not return to their land for more than 18 centuries. It was a miserable time, as the Roman armies laid siege to Jerusalem for around 4 months before slaughtering its inhabitants and removing the remainder as captives. While the Romans would occupy the land of Israel for many years, it changed hands and was also subject to the control of many Gentile nations. Now the Jewish nation was established to usher in the kingdom of God, and with the failure of bearing fruit, this was transferred temporarily to the church. While it is not covered in this parable, the church will not only occupy this right as tenants until the tribulation period, where both Jerusalem and the repentant Jew will turn to faith in Jesus.
Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And whoever falls on the stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder."
Jesus quoted from Psalm 118, where he showed that their rejection of him was predicted in the writings of their ancestors. Jesus is often compared to as a stone or rock in the Bible. Luke emphasized that those who the stone falls on will be broken in pieces, while anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. The interpretation of the stone is virtually unanimously agreed by all scholars, including amillennialists, preterists, and even the critics, as representing the kingdom of God. The psalmist declared, "The Lord is my rock." Who is the rock except our God? My Lord, my rock, and my Redeemer. David, in his cry for mercy, also referred to God, declaring, "To you, Lord, I call. You are my rock." In most cases, the idea of God symbolically representing a rock is also linked to salvation and has significant messianic undertones. In the New Testament, Jesus is described as the spiritual rock which was with them, the living stone rejected by men, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. While God ushers judgment, He also provides both grace and mercy. As a cornerstone, He causes the proud to stumble, while those who are humble or broken come willingly to receive His grace. However, those who reject Him as the stone ultimately crushes them to death, where they are described as being ground like powder. The parable comes to a close with these words. While not part of the parable, you may have been wondering what followed, especially since the Pharisees had perceived that Jesus was talking about them. All three Gospels reveal that both the Pharisees and the scribes realized that they were the object lesson. Jesus had just pronounced judgment upon them, and they retreated in shock. Instead of listening to the facts of the case, they were even more determined to kill Jesus. Yet they feared the crowd, and although they perceived the parable was spoken against them, they left. Matthew emphasized that the reason for their fear was that the crowds believed that Jesus was a prophet. But within the same week, Jesus was crucified, and this prophetic parable was fulfilled.
Everyone ultimately has a choice. Follow the grace that God has given you, or be like those wicked servants and reject your calling in receiving salvation. Parable, it implies that the separation is permanent, but there are many other prophecies which confirm that this separation or rejection of the Jewish race is only of a temporal nature. But more on that next time. Till then, Maranatha.